there. We just concluded a session on human rights issues in the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a sister issue to that particular issue. And here we will be talking about privacy and trust, understanding the impact of these in the current COVID-19 pandemic. The moderator for this session is working with the PRIDA project at the African Union Commission. Her name is Dr. Margaret Nyambura. Margaret, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you from wherever you are connecting from. And greetings from East Africa, where I am connecting from. We are glad to be part of this meeting. And as it has been mentioned, I am working for the PRIDA project, and PRIDA is a policy and regulation initiative for digital Africa. And one of our mandates at PRIDA is to strengthen the regional, national, and continental IGFs and the School of IGF. So we are glad to be part of the West Africa IGF. And we are also doing streamlining activities through capacity building and ensuring that we have a common voice as Africa. Coming to the topic of these discussions, we are focusing on privacy and trust. We need to understand the impact of trust and privacy in the content and the current COVID-19 pandemic. We all know, and from the previous discussions, we are living in unprecedented times. No one can afford to not to be in the digital space, but at the same time, there is quite a lot happening in this digital space. There is fake news, cybercrimes, misinformation, and yet we have to be connected. For the last 3 or even 4 months, we have been stuck with our children at home, and we have to do e-learning. So even if you had said you don't want to go into cyberspace, you are forced to do that because schools have started giving classes online. And with that comes the issues of how do we ensure that we remain safe? How do we balance privacy for our citizens while ensuring safety concerns are addressed? Governments are at crossroads wondering how do they keep this balance. At the same time, how do we ensure responsibility and accountability in the digital space to ensure that the vulnerable populations are protected? We have children that can be exposed to all sorts of things, and we have the elderly people who through mobile money and internet-related banking, they are prone to all these kind of challenges. How do we ensure that we are protecting them in this era of COVID-19? With me to discuss this topic, I have a team of eminent persons working in the digital space with diverse roles. We'll start introducing them with Dr. Nnenna, a lawyer and academic specializing in law and technology. She is a senior lecturer of law and technology at the Hillary Rodham Clinton School of Law in the United Kingdom. Before joining the institution, she was a law lecturer at the Lancaster University in Ghana campus, where she taught cybercrime and intellectual property law. She holds a Bachelor of degree in law, a Master's of Law degree, an International Information Technology law with distinction, and also a Doctorate of Laws degree. She also holds various certificates. She has attended various courses with academic credits, including an international criminal law course at the University of Salzburg in Austria, and other courses offered by the World Intellectual Property and the World Trade Organization. Currently, Dr. Nnenna serves as the Vice Chair of the African Union Cybersecurity Experts Group, and she has written for a range of academic and journals and media publications in the area of cyber law, cybercrime, digital rights, and international law. So welcome, Dr. Nnenna. Next to her, we have Mr. Ouanilo Fagla, who holds a master's degree in information technology. He has approximately 15 years of significant international experience in research and development in the field of cybersecurity and entrepreneurship. He previously managed computer schools in Paris before returning to Benin in 2016 as a digital project manager at the Presidency of the Republic, where he supported implementation of several projects. His main focus now is in field of digital security, national scale initiatives such as creation and management of the National Agency for Information System Security. We welcome Mr. Ouanilo. And finally, we have Dr. Olaleda Shylon, who holds a doctorate in human rights law from the University of Pretoria. Dr. Shylon leads privacy policy engagement across Africa and the Middle East at the Facebook. In this role, she's responsible for engaging with privacy stakeholders, including data protection authorities, policymakers, academics, and civil society organizations. She is a human rights lawyer with expertise spanning in three information-related rights, that is rights of freedom of expression, access to information, and privacy. She has led and participated in developing regional normative frameworks, as well as engaged in research, capacity building, and advocacy in relation to these three areas. She previously worked at the Center of Human Rights at the University of Pretoria and at the Secretariat of the African Commission of Human People's Rights in Banjul in Gambia. So we warmly welcome the three panelists. And to start us off, I'll ask a question that I would want Dr. Shalon to address first. And the question is, what confidence building measures should all in cyberspace advance to reduce and eliminate causes of mistrust, fear, misunderstanding, misinformation that may stem from the use of digital?
Sorry, Margaret. Lolade is not on the call yet. She hasn't joined yet. So can I suggest you move to either one of the other panelists before she joins?
That is perfect. I would request Ouanilo to start us with that question. And while he answers this, he could also tell us what are the responsibilities of public
on vous entend.
In regulating all policy content. Welcome, Mr. Ouanilo. Mr. Ouanilo, the floor is yours.
Bonjour. Très bien.
Good afternoon. Very well then. I will respond. Right, so thank you to the organizers for inviting me to the webinar, and thanks to all participants. I'm Ouanilo Medegan. I'm an instructor at the Security Center at Benin. So the question, if I got you correctly, is what do policymakers have to do to fight against misinformation and the lags in the digital world? Looking at the digital economy, there is a lack of trust, and that is one of the major challenges that we have in the field. There are different reasons for this, and one that comes to mind is administration. The administration in our region, in most of our countries, many people use their email addresses, yahoo.com, Gmail, etc. Now it's true that there is a lack of governmental infrastructure to absorb even public servants, etc. But there's another fear. You will find that even with an official option, people prefer to remain in Yahoo and Gmail because they have the impression that they're being monitored, that they're being watched. Of course, it is true that it's not an impossibility, but you must understand that when you're in a professional environment, what you're doing does not belong to you personally. It belongs to the company or the entity. Now, of course, this is a practice that is very common in Anglo-Saxon areas, to have an eye to monitor what employees are doing. But of course, that can easily be defined. When you get into an organization, sign an agreement, and the agreement would state that digital resources, devices are monitored by the company, are supervised and monitored by your managers. And you know that when you go to a personal website using your official work device, then there is a possibility that you are being monitored. So you shouldn't be afraid of monitoring on the one hand. You should just be transparent. So for that, we should talk about transparency. And talking about transparency, people need to know what they're involved in. They need to know what they signed up for. And the only time that trust is undermined is when things are done without an agreement, where it is done even without the knowledge of persons. And so I think that at policymaking level, there should be a proper framework, a regulatory framework that states, for example, that in the event that a state is to carry out some form of due diligence, for example, for the purpose of investigation, that it should be done within a specific framework, and we should know who the powers and the counterpowers are. And then I'll come back to some of the measures more specifically that we can take in terms of strategies, actions, projects, etc. But the main actions that should be undertaken are the regulatory framework to ensure trust, not only in digital trust, but also between citizens and the state. And then beyond that, there's need for education, because it's not only the state that is a stakeholder when it comes to monitoring or fake news. Here in Africa, we have a problem with fake news. People are intoxicated with false information, and perhaps the best way to counter that is not a top-down approach. It's not one entity that will fight all of this, because there's just too many people and stakeholders involved. It is a multi-stakeholder involvement within the cyberspace. So you have to be able to educate people, and you do that through several channels: sensitization, workshops. You have to target different types of people, different publics, stakeholders, decision makers, policy makers, lay persons, experts, persons with a special interest in the country's matters. There is need to adapt this information, this education, to all sorts of people, so that all of cyberspace is covered, and especially everything that has to do with inaccurate information, fake news, etc. Another thing that the state could do is put in place reliable channels. For instance, in Benin, in the case of COVID, we had so much fake news. We had plethora of information, conspiracy theories going around, and the response of the government was to bombard on these same channels. They bombarded the right information. They said that the true information is available on such and such a channel, and that was able to convince people where to get the right information to. And every time people got information, they could double check at the government channels or using official channels to be sure that they had the right information. So that's what I would say as a quick response in terms of responsibility of stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Ouanilo. Quite interesting interventions that we need to get all involved. We need to work in cooperation. We need every stakeholder that has a stake to take a role, and together we ensure that responsibility and accountability, they go hand in hand. Probably to add on that, we'll have Dr. Nnenna to give us her perspective into that. Welcome, Dr. Nnenna.
Thank you, Margaret. I have said that during this period of COVID-19, we have experienced two kinds of virus: the COVID-19 virus, and then the virus of misinformation, misunderstanding as well. In fact, it has been a huge virus that has permeated different aspects of our life, making so many of us vulnerable. Indeed, yes, we are vulnerable. But I would say that confidence building measures will require a multi-stakeholder approach, just like Ouanilo has pointed out. But I'll try to throw in a sort of legal perspective to that answer, in saying that henceforth, what we have experienced with COVID-19 in terms of misinformation will not go away, it will remain. And so Africa has to prioritize cyber safety. It is important that we prioritize cyber safety as the increase in digital technology, the use in digital technology is being employed. And how do we prioritize cyber safety? First, African governments and states need to develop cybersecurity strategies. It is at this point that it's very important that we begin to have digital rights laws. This will ensure trust. This will ensure understanding amongst the citizenry. It will be a huge measure in developing confidence building mechanisms. Now, by the time we develop strategies, by the time we develop policies and laws, it is important that we implement them. Going through many African states, you have data protection laws. Most of these laws are not even implemented. Sometimes it seems like we lack understanding of what these laws are supposed to do. The citizens, individuals are not even aware that some of these rights exist. And so people are basically interested in using digital technologies without being concerned about the safety measures or safety attributes that come with the use of digital technologies. Now, beyond the implementation, we have to begin monitoring in Africa. There's lack of statistics in terms of usage, in terms of issues that border on cyber safety and cyber hygiene. Again, we must properly ensure that there are reporting mechanisms. I tell you that so many financial institutions are experiencing data breaches, experiencing issues that lead to distrust in cyberspace, but a lot cannot report for fear of the ripple effect and people knowing that they've been attacked. So that it is important that we ensure that we have appropriate report mechanisms, above all, enforcement as well. These laws are there, even if they are drafted in the most draconian terms, without enforcement, these laws or strategies are as good as an exercise in futility. I would also talk about employing a human rights approach to building confidence in terms of use of digital technology. By the time we approach this from a human rights perspective, it would give room for accountability and transparency and inclusion, so that nobody is left out. While we raise awareness, like Ouanilo has pointed out, while we raise awareness, while we train, we ensure that there is proper inclusion, there is transparency, and there is accountability. Above all, every sector has to be involved. The private sector, the civil societies, institutions, and even individuals themselves. And this is where raising awareness will come in. Technology companies have to be involved, businesses have to be involved, so that we form a roundtable in deciding how we go about ensuring confidence building. Now, talking about the role of public authorities, I would not want to repeat a lot of things Ouanilo has said. One of the things I want to point out is policies and laws again. Misinformation stems from spamming. A lot of the messages that have been going on this period has been based on phishing and spamming, a lot of misinformation. We need to begin to reassess what we regard as spamming in terms of law. While we may not call spamming a crime per se, spamming can lead to trespass. It's a form of trespass. I would cast our minds to a very popular case on CompuServe in the US. And the government established that spamming depreciates the value of digital technologies. And as such, people who engage in spamming should be held liable for trespass to chattel. We can begin to have such laws in Africa. Above all, internet service providers, online intermediaries should also be held responsible. When we begin to attribute secondary liability to online service providers, I think it would help us to strengthen our resolve in policing the cyberspace. So because of time, I would stop there, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nnenna, for those quite inspirational points. Before we proceed, we want to test whether the voice is okay with the interpreters. So I ask the moderator to do the testing before we proceed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Margaret. We've just had a few comments that the interpretation is not too clear. So I just want to check with the interpreters. Can you please hear all the speakers okay? Can we check the English and French channels, please?
This is interpreter 1 on the English channel. Do you hear the interpretation?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Perfect. So we move on, and we invite our third panelist, Dr. Shalon, who has just joined us. Dr. Shalon, I will read to you the question again that we have been answering. And the question is, and it is actually posted in the chat forum, but I'll ask you from the Facebook perspective and from generally your perspective, what confidence building measures should all in cyberspace advance to reduce and eliminate causes of mistrust, fear, misunderstanding, and misinformation that may stem from the use of digital technologies? And while you are answering that, let us know the responsibilities of public authorities in regulating all policy content. Welcome, Dr. Shalon. Dr. Shalon, the floor is yours. Are we on?
Yes, I think we just lost her.
Okay. Fine then. I think what we will do, we will continue with the next set of questions. When she comes, she will be able to address that one. And this one goes to Mr. Ouanilo. And no, I start with Dr. Nnenna. Dr. Nnenna, from a human rights perspective, and apologies that you have just been speaking and we are getting back to you again, but just you can choose to be, sorry, I see Dr. Shylon is on now. Dr. Shylon, can we come to you first?
Yes, sure. I'm so sorry. I had a problem with my connection. Yeah. So on the issue of misinformation, I would just like to. I mean, it's been said that the private companies, in industry like Facebook, have a role to play in preventing misinformation. Completely agree. And so I wanted to just speak briefly, specifically in the context of COVID-19, some of the steps that Facebook has tried to take to sort of address this issue, to try and ensure that we handle the problem that we have in relation to misinformation in the context of health issues. And so one of the things that we've done is to develop the COVID Information Center, where you can get information from like the WHO or UNICEF, in terms of, so it's country by country. And so on top of your news feed, if you use Facebook, it directs you there and you can go there and get up-to-date, accurate information about COVID. That is one of the measures that has been taken. Another measure relates to WhatsApp. So we know that there's a lot of complaints across, not just Africa, but across the world about how messages go viral on WhatsApp. And so previously, what had been done was to try and reduce, so they are highly forwarded messages. If you look at your WhatsApp, if you receive a message, if it has a double arrow, that's two arrows, that means it's a highly forwarded message. And so one of the measures that has been taken has been to prevent me, for example, if I receive a highly forwarded message, I can only forward it to one person, at a go. So I can't forward it to more than one person. Previously, it was there was no limit, and then it became 5, and now it's only one person. And within 3 weeks of making that change, we saw that there was a 70% reduction of the number of highly forwarded messages on WhatsApp, which I think is a good thing. Another thing that has been done is to sort of have like a WhatsApp bot messaging service whereby people can send a message and then a bot, asking for questions about, health-related issues to COVID, and they will, engage with the bot, and the bot will give them, all the kind of information that they need that is accurate. And this is also linked to like UNICEF and the WHO as well. And just very generally speaking about the basic steps that we take as Facebook to prevent misinformation, is that we first of all, we ban ads on listings that imply that a product will guarantee a cure or prevent people from contacting COVID-19. As you know, there's been a lot of misinformation around saying if you drink this, it prevents you from COVID. If you do that, it prevents you from COVID, prevents you from getting COVID. So all those kind of things create a lot of problems, and like it goes viral very easily. And so there is no opportunity for those kind of ads or listings, on Facebook that will sort of spread or perpetuate those kinds of misinformation. Also, we also saw a lot of conspiracy theories, about 5G and all those kind of things. And so those are the kind of things that we use our fact checkers to check, and they help us to debunk those claims. And so we do not necessarily take all of those claims off the platform. We reduce it in ranking, but at the same time, we put a note there to explain and say, this theory is actually a conspiracy theory. It's inaccurate. it's false, it's partially false, or whatever, to sort of give more context so that people would see it. And if they see it on other platforms, because realize that simply taking it off, like for example, Facebook, doesn't mean it's not going to reappear in WhatsApp. So if you rather provide context and explain that this information is absolutely false, when the same person sees it somewhere else, they can say to themselves or to other people that information is actually completely false, and you shouldn't, rely on that or spread it any further. So those are some of the steps that have been taken. But just to go back and talk, like more generally speaking, about how do we address this issue, and I think really in terms of balancing privacy, freedom of expression, and security and all those things, I think we really have to take a human rights-based approach to this issue, because at the end of the day, FOE, privacy, they are all, and safety, they are all rights. But I mean, no rights are absolute. And so it's about how do we ensure that we balance those rights appropriately. And I think the human rights framework gives us a lot of room for that, without going into much detail about that. But I think that is really the way to go, to see how we balance rights appropriately. But of course, it always has to be on a case-by-case basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shalon. And to the panelists, I remind you that now we have to stick to 4 minutes so that we do not overrun the time. And this question will go to Dr. Nnenna. And Dr. Nnenna, I'll ask you, is there a need for an oversight on the application of rules to ensure conformation across the continent? We have all agreed that we need to come up with norms, standards, and principles. But is there a need for an oversight body? And should these norms, standards, and principles be contextualized to address the local environment? The floor is yours, Dr. Nnenna.
Thank you. Absolutely. The question you've asked is very important, and it's imperative. I will start by saying that the African Union has moved in the right direction by promulgating the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Data Protection. Now, that law has been in place, but for that law to be effective, African states need to ratify that document. Now, it is a broad document that not only focuses on cybercrime, it focuses on cybersecurity as a whole, focuses on privacy as well as data protection for individuals. And so it is important to emphasize that at a regional level, yes, there have already been efforts aimed in that direction. What is remaining is that law, is futile without states ratifying, and very few African states are ratifying this law. What is more amusing is that African states are rather ratifying the Budapest Convention, which comes from EU, without first ratifying what is here in Africa. So that is a first push. And I think, however, in this COVID era, the African Union itself has been a bit laid back, forgive me to say, in speaking about this issue of privacy and data protection in the terms of COVID-19. Presently, there is an international data protection guideline on coronavirus through COVID-19. This is an international document which includes guidelines published by data protection authorities worldwide on data privacy and security obligations during the COVID-19 outbreak. No African comment is in that document. You have from the EU, you have from the America, you have from Asia, but something that is evidently missing is an African voice. So yes, we need the regional effort in this regard, and a lot has to be done in that regard. Now, looking at what states can do. States can do a lot of things. Firstly, by ratifying that Malabo Convention. It is very important that states ratify the Malabo Convention from a legal and policy perspective. States need to harmonize data protection laws. I will take a cue from what Ouanilo had said earlier about awareness. We talk about awareness and training in terms of individuals. I beg to say that African governments themselves are not even aware of the importance of some of these discussions we're having. Because if they did, they will realize that issues bordering on digital technology, cybersecurity are not tied to any geographically proximate location. These are issues that are across continents, across national jurisdictions. And so it is important that we begin to cooperate now and harmonize data protection laws. African states need to also promulgate privacy and data protection laws in their jurisdictions. We must also think about proportionality and necessity. Yes, what is going on is important. It is important that states take advantage of data to provide statistics and analysis in this COVID era. It is important that states take advantage of data and infringe privacy to an extent to allow for information about COVID-19, to know who is dying, who is surviving, who is being cured. But at the same time, while we infringe these rights, privacy, data protection rights, it must also be proportional and necessary to meet legal and national aims. We must also think about impact assessments. At this stage, there are hardly any statistics. We must think about the impact assessments to privacy. Governments must specify the role of data controllers. What is happening to our data? How is it being protected? What is the right of citizens, data subjects? Can I ask that my information be deleted? What is being done with my information? How long can my information be kept? These are what states can do, as well as getting involved with the private sector as well. Finally, I must talk about individuals. Let's not always focus on states, organizations, and businesses. Individuals need to be given control, and this is through awareness. Individuals must be allowed to give consent. I should give consent with regards to how my privacy is breached and how my information is collected. The apps and technologies being used must give information about what data is going to be collected and how it will be tracked and what have you. So these are just few of the things I would talk about in terms of how authorities, through policy and legislation, can ensure data privacy and protection in this era. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Nnenna, for those comments. To go with that, I'll get to Ouanilo. And Ouanilo will ask you, and this will be the last question before we go to the Q&A. I see there are quite a number of questions there. Ouanilo, with the exponential growth of digital technologies globally, are we as African states reaping maximum benefits? What more can we do to build the necessary trust, which is a prerequisite to reap the benefits of the digital space? And in doing that, we ensure that we strike the balance between freedoms and national security concerns. I know Dr. Nnenna has emphasized on that, but do you have anything more to add on that? The floor is yours, Mr. Ouanilo.
Bien reçu, merci beaucoup. Alors, globalement, donc je vais essayer d'aller très vite parce que j'ai beaucoup de choses à... Il y a pas mal de sujets.
Right, thank you. I will try to go very quickly because quite a lot was stated. Let me take the Beninois context. In the Beninois context, the very first step that the government took was to adopt a new digital code. Now, the digital code has about 650 articles, and it essentially changes the structure of the digital environment in Benin. What it addresses is personal data, among others. So it sets up an committee. We already had a committee that worked in digital matters, but now this committee has its powers enhanced. It now covers all its work, covers everything that goes on in digital space. For example, in COVID, we have a national task force that was led by the government, and they produced a contact tracing application. The contact tracing application was not immediately launched because it had to go through the relevant authority.
Application was not published immediately. It had to go through a filter to ensure that data collected are well protected. And then beyond that, the application had to go through a system whereby all the encryption on personal data are in line and ready for implementation. So that is how that application was endorsed and proposed with regards to curbing the spread of COVID-19. Since we had a serious problem on information, on disinformation rather, that aspect is very strong. it tries to sanitize the environment and implement the legal framework.
Par exemple, on voit beaucoup de gens aujourd'hui qui se lèvent, qui créent un groupe WhatsApp, qui créent une page Facebook et qui décident qu'ils sont des organes de presse.
And specifies where the decisions are taken and also the reports on such activities. So generally, the digital framework gives a better coverage for that, and then distills fake news, and then provides a framework for cyber crime. Now, today, on what we call digital economy, we can see all the examples today in terms of digital economy, the digital economies in the world. We can also see, well, I will not mention all the various cases. Now, there are some steps that Jumia, for instance, had skipped, because one of the components of that context is digital trust. In Africa, will people easily embrace the digital space in terms of our mentality and how we embrace the consumption? For instance, e-service. Today, the Beninese government is placing emphasis on e-service, but the challenge is to get people to trust such services. People don't want to put in their information, personal information, their credit card details, and so on. And sometimes to avoid having to pay tax, sometimes they are not sure that their funds will end up in pirates, in the hands of digital pirates, and so on. So people need to trust whatever system you put in place. So recently, we adopted digital security, national policy on digital security, and the emphasis was to draw trust. For instance, there is an aspect on improving the reputation of the Beninese cyberspace. When you go to the internet, there's usually the part where you have to justify that you're not a robot. So these are things that prevent access. For instance, in Benin, you cannot navigate in certain areas because of the chaos. Some of our sites, our ISPs, are affected by malware and all sorts of problems. So this is a deterrent for people who want to launch their small businesses. All right. Okay, I'm speaking quickly. So we need to work on improving that cyberspace environment. Let us not also forget, the interpreter has lost the speaker. Interpreter has lost the speaker. I've lost sound from the speaker.
Hello, Mr. Ouanilo, we are not able to follow you.
All those services that depend on trust, there is a challenge.
Okay, we cannot hear you, Mr. Ouanilo. At the same time, we are running out of time.
Ok, très bien. Donc, je passe la parole à la suite. Donc, je voulais juste conclure sur le point.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. So I was just trying to round up on the trust service, which is really a basis for good digital services. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Ouanilo. I note we are running out of time and we need to address the questions, the question and answer session. And I will start with the second questions in the QA, and I'll ask Dr. Shola to address it. And the question is, what strategies can we use to ensure public authorities consult more as they implement, as the implementation of laws and policies? Also, can we analyze how representative cybersecurity task force are in the state in order to assess the extent to which citizens can trust them? Dr. Shalon, I ask you to address that.
Okay, so thank you very much. In terms of ensuring that public authorities consult, that really is a tough one. I think that the expectation is that there are systems in place to ensure that before any law or policy, regardless of whether it has to do with online world, digital issues, the expectation is that there are systems in place to ensure that there is that level of widespread consultation, on any of these issues. But beyond that, I think it's also important to look at it from the context of what are the kinds of ways that citizens on the ground can sort of ensure that this happens, to ensure that this happens even when the government doesn't want that to happen, or even when governments don't take the initiative. And basically, I think it's about looking for any single avenue that is available, and making the best of it. So for example, so focusing on human rights frameworks that we can use to address this kind of issues. We have the African Commission, for example, on Human and People's Rights, which is the body on the continent that's meant to implement the African Charter. And a lot of what we're talking about has a lot of implications for rights. So freedom of expression, access to information, the right to privacy. How do we get that body to sort of force states to engage? The Commission has every year, of course, because of COVID, that hasn't happened, twice a session where you have states go and present what they have done to give effect to the rights in the Charter. So if, for example, a state that hasn't been engaging or ensuring that there's consultation on any of the issues or policies they are passing is up for consideration, then that is the role of CSOs and all activists to put that for the Commission and ask, why hasn't this state been engaging? And get the Commission to sort of require or request the state to do that. But beyond, and I think doing that at a regional level, I think states would tend to listen to that, over and above just staying local and focusing on advocacy internally. But we cannot let out of sight advocacy internally to ensure that, is it the Human Rights Commission, if there's a Human Rights Commission that exists, to ensure that that is actually taken on board. I think that's very, very important. And also, I believe that it's beyond policies in terms of the legislative process. Many of these laws are actually released for public commentary. It is at that stage that everybody has to get involved to ensure that their voices are heard on whatever the topic is. So I think, briefly speaking, I would say that we have to make the space, even if states or public authorities are not willing to. It has to be, it's incumbent upon activists, civil society, advocacy groups to make that space for conversations about anything that has to do with rights of citizens on ground. Even if the state is not willing to do that, the space has to be created one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shalon. We have 3 more questions. I think the first question has already been answered in our discussions on what measures can be used to limit misinformation during a pandemic situation. I think that has been answered as we progressively continued. I'll ask the moderator to read for us the third question, which is in French, and the fourth one as well. Then any of the panelists can pick and answer it. Over to you, the moderator.
All right, Margaret. My native language is actually English, so I'm going to attempt to read this in French. Okay, so we have a question from Ava, and she says, "Ce sujet sur la désinformation est très important et il soulève la question des coupures d'Internet qui sont fréquentes dans nos pays africains." I hope I've said that correctly. There is a second aspect to that. It says, qu'est-ce que nos panélistes peuvent dire sur ces sujets?
Sorry, is our interpretation working?
Fake
Hang on a second.
Fake news is a serious matter, and I'm trying to see what this word is. and there's also the issue of frequent internet discussion, internet connection in African countries. What do the panelists have to say on this?
If the moderator allow me, I will answer if possible.
Yeah, go ahead and be very brief.
Ok, donc de manière très brève, en fait, effectivement.
I'll be very brief. Internet disconnections where all internet disconnections come when we see during electoral periods. We see that there's a lot of disinformation, and we have not been able to put in place the appropriate resources to check this. So just as we have high flows in borders during election period, so during elections, we see internet being disconnected as a way of a security measure, the same way that we have borders closed during elections. And this is as a security check.
Thank you very much, Ouanilo, for that response. We go to another question, and this is in English from Jackson. And Jackson, who is from the Lawyers Hub in Kenya, we all agree that most legislations in our parliaments in Africa are not vast to the issues of data protection and cybersecurity. The civil society, for instance, the Lawyers Hub have tried to engage the governments on policies, but mostly you realize that after giving the input, the legislature doesn't consider the input from the civil society. What steps should the civil society take to create awareness to the public? Anyone who can take this question?
Can I? Yeah, I'd like to take that question. So I think the reality is that on the one hand, until people really understand how much an issue directly impacts or affects them, they will not be willing to sort of go the extra mile to demand for that, for whatever the issue is. And so I think it's really about creating more awareness and letting people understand what are the implications of not having your data safe and secure. And not painting it as an issue about, as an issue that comes across as elitist, to say, oh, if you use your phone in a particular way, or if you use your computer, because some people don't have phones, and for them, that's not a priority. How do you make sure that you couch the conversation in a manner that is addressing the basic concerns that people would have? And I believe that once you do that and explain to people that it's basic information about, for example, if you require identification, if your country has the national ID system, and you need that, for example, to vote, it's about helping people to understand that once you have that document, and people have for example, your ID number, and that ID number is misused in different ways, it has negative impact on you. For example, if you need to access social services and then somebody else has the same ID number as you, what then happens? That means you are locked out until that issue is clarified, and it could take 5 years, and you're there without any access to different kinds of services. So it's about bringing it down to the level of the grassroots and helping people to understand that data protection, privacy issues they affect almost every area of your life. And once you do that, people will come on board and fight for it. And with that knowledge and awareness on the part of ordinary citizens, I think those in authority will listen more and be willing to engage on data protection issues.
Thank you very much, Shalon. Is there any question that we may have missed to answer? Feel free to put on your mic and state it and
sorry. If I'm not taking over the space, I just wanted to also reflect a bit on the question that was asked before mine about internet shutdowns to highlight that it's a problem we have on the continent. And I know recently the ECOWAS court ruled that it's actually a violation of rights to actually shut down the internet. That was a case brought in relation to Togo. And say that we cannot always have security to trump other rights. At the end of the day, when you want to limit rights, there has to be a way going about it. And if you look at the African Commission, like I mentioned before, recently published a document where it sought to sort of expound on the right to freedom of expression and access to information as provided under the African Charter. And right there, it says that states are not to interfere with the rights contained in the Charter unless it undertakes the three-part test, which requires that any interference must be prescribed by law, it must pursue a legitimate aim, and also it must be necessary and proportionate to achieve that stated aim in a democratic society. So all those three elements have to be in place. There must be a law that actually allows that to happen. The aim of that law must be legitimate, and it must be in a way that actually, it must be an aim that is necessary and that is proportionate. It cannot be. And so when you shut down the internet, for me, I mean, and from what other international human rights mandates have said, that is disproportionate, because you're basically saying that everyone in that country cannot access the internet. There's no way that can actually be proportionate, in my opinion. So I think security can't be really a trump card. There has to be checks and balances, and that check and balance is really about ensuring that whatever action you're going to take to limit any right meets the three-part test. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question that we may not have addressed? I noted Koliwa is restating her question, but I think that was answered. Any other question that has not been answered? Before I give the panelists each 3 minutes to make closing remarks, probably 2 actually. Nothing. So.
Sorry, I see there was a question, and I'm seeing my name, but I have an issue. I can't scroll up to see what the question was. There was a question directed at me, but I can't scroll up to see the question.
Yeah, there was a question on fact checking.
Okay.
And the question was on Facebook is it's kind of just impact of collaboration on fact checking. I think that's what it is. But there's that, and then there's something on public authorities. So essentially, I think Kaliwe wants to know what Facebook is doing about fact checking and how you are collaborating with other people, and the impact you have seen in the collaboration.
Okay. So far, I think we have over 50 organizations around the world that Facebook is working with to fact check. And I think on the African continent, honestly, I can't remember the exact number, but we are continuously trying to expand because really we think that it's one of the many tools. It's not a silver bullet by any means, but it's one of the many tools that we think are very, very important to sort of try and curb the spread of misinformation, and also to help people in a credible way to sort of know what is right from what is wrong. And so we've been expanding that over time, and we have quite a few organizations that we're working with on the continent on that. But like I said earlier, I think there's so many other things that need to go hand in hand with fact checking, because there's only so much fact checking can do. Like I mentioned, also what we try and do is there are different ways that different things are flagged for fact checking. So it could be that someone actually reports it right there in Facebook, or when we notice that from conversations, people are talking about something being, a false report, or we also use machine learning to sort of pick up, things that are potentially in progress, because we try to experiences from what our fact checkers have already, then build that into the system to extract things that are appearing as. So like I said, it's an ongoing process. We are looking at other means, and I think one other very, very important one is digital literacy. How do you encourage people to sort of look beyond and take pause, look at what they're reading, see, does it even make sense? Is it, dig a bit deeper and not automatically just forward or, assume everything they see online is true and it's real. That's one thing. And also even to train journalists as well about how do they go about, conveying news. So sometimes you see that the heading of the news is different from what is actually in there, or people refabricate things that have been, in another context. For example, if a building was born in India like 5 years ago, it's that same video is used and repurposed, and a different heading is put in there. So there's a lot of the different ways that we need to address misinformation. There is no silver bullet, and really on our part is a work in progress. We're continuously trying to look for reputable organizations that we can partner with to fact check, across our platforms. I don't know if that answers Koliwe's question.
Thank you, Shalon. We are really running out of time, and there is a final question that I'll ask Nnenna to address together with her closing remarks. So the question is from Peter from Liberia. More African countries are signing up to the Budapest Convention due to the popularization and EU funding and working to educate more countries through the World Bank and other. It now lies on the African Union to popularize the Convention on Cybersecurity on Data Protection. What measures is African Union putting in place to ensure all countries sign up? Nnenna, being a member of the African Union Cybersecurity Expert Group, what are we doing in that area? And use this to make your closing remarks as well.
Thank you, Margaret. The question with Nigeria, Africa, beyond just the funding and all of that, is what I had mentioned before, which is prioritization of cybersecurity issues. We tend to put cybersecurity issues behind. However, in recent times, the African Union has decided to popularize cybersecurity, and that has started with, the putting together of the African Union Cybersecurity Experts Group, which is a group of 10 member experts from the 5 regions in Africa. Now, one of our mandates as a group is to seek for, advocate for the ratification of the Malabo Convention. And so far this year, there has been an increase in a number of states. There are so many campaigns going on, awareness raising, webinars like this as well, which has yielded an increase in people making inquiries and states deciding to sign on. Apart from that, there are also plans to engage in cyber diplomacy courses and events to encourage parliamentarians across Africa to sensitize African parliamentarians on the need to ratify the Malabo Convention. So there are processes in place. Apart from this, I would also say that the African Union sector that is involved with cybersecurity has been engaging in multi-stakeholder approach with so many efforts with civil organizations to ensure that civil organizations also carry on these campaigns to parliamentarians and governments as well. So there have been a series of events, capacity building measures as well.
Thank you, Nnenna. And now, as part of your closing remarks, Ouanilo, there's a question that you'll address together with it. How can youth be involved in West Africa Internet Governance Forum activities? Over to you, Mr. Ouanilo.
Ok, pardon, je n'ai pas forcément trop bien compris la question, mais...
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question, but I just want to say that the African Union has to invest in promoting dissemination and even marketing. When we look at the European context, they invest in the Budapest Convention, they invite member countries to disseminate information on it. So we see a lot of energy concentrated in terms of finances, energy on that project. So the African Union has to adopt the same posture. Benin has already signed the convention, and we are working on the ratification also in line with the Malabo Convention. So where all the issues on sovereignty, and handling of its cyberspace as each member state works it. So we need to also work in line with what is happening elsewhere in the world. People have to be sensitized. People have to be informed to know that governments are doing everything to protect data within their cyberspace, and all that can be done through small activities. For instance, in Benin, we did something which is small but had a wide impact when we had to bring MPs together and talk to them about cybersecurity. And different people have organized workshops targeting different decision makers. For instance, ministers, the government ministers were brought together for a whole day. They were informed and trained on cybersecurity or cyberspace and digitalization. So these are opportunities that have been offered with all these questions. Thank you for the opportunity to answer.
Thank you, Ouanilo, for answering that question. The specific question had asked is below, and I'll ask Shalon to make her closing remarks as she addresses the question, which is, how can youth be involved in West Africa Internet Forum activities? Mr. Shalon, as you make your closing remarks.
It's actually missed. So my closing remarks, I would like to say there's been a lot of conversation today about the need to ratify the Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. I just want to say that as Facebook, we welcome regulation in different spheres, on privacy as well. Something that we want to note is that in future, and it might become problematic, is the tendency to sort of conflate cybersecurity and data protection issues as if they're one and the same thing. And I think it's important, even though we have it separated in the convention, it's important to also mention that privacy and data protection goes beyond cyberspace. Like I mentioned before, it's everyday things, and privacy is an enabling right. And so that in implementing, even at the state level, that we don't look only at privacy and data protection only in the digital sphere, but also look at how we can uphold that right in the offline world as well, which I think is equally as important. That's what the main thing I wanted to say. And also to say that in terms of misinformation, a path that we're seeing a lot of countries following in the era of COVID is criminalizing misinformation, which we don't really believe is the way to go, and could actually have the alternate effect from what is actually intended. In terms of how youth can engage more in the internet governance sphere, to be honest with you, I think as someone who is working in industry, I'm really the wrong person to ask that kind of question. I think really at the end of the day, it's about what mechanisms exist on the ground for them to engage, and how are they being informed, and how is awareness being created about the mechanisms and how their impact will be in engaging in those mechanisms on the ground. That's what I can say. Like, how are we reaching the youths, and how are we informing them about what exists and what impact they can make, and what change they can make to make the internet governance sphere a better sphere for them. Because also at the end of the day, what happens there affects them, and they need to be part of the solutions, because it's going to affect them in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shalon. And probably to add on what you have said, for the youth within the Internet Governance Forum, there are youth forums that most countries have started. And basically through that, you are able to start engaging on the issues. As PRIDA, we have developed a course that we are now testing with the first 10 countries. And basically it's about School of Internet Governance content that gives basic IG concepts. It is classed into 8 modules, and it is free for the countries. We shall be publicizing it very soon. We are currently holding the School of Internet Governance this week with Botswana, and they're using our content. Next week we'll be having Eswatini, and we'll be having Madagascar, and they'll all be using this content that is on Moodle. So basically we will work through the national IGF and the regional IGF to ensure that you can access this content as the youth, because as we are saying, with the future of digitization and everybody being online, we need our youth to be at the forefront to understand, first of all, the internet has both positive outcome and negative outcome based on how we use it. And basically, we are not going to say that because there are all these negative outcomes or usage, we are not going to focus on it. We just need to ensure that we build the capacity of the young people in the right way and to show them what exactly are the positive development outcomes that can be derived through the use of cyberspace. And with that, then we move with our youth to the future where we are not just consuming what comes through the internet and the digital space, but we are part of the development. We are engaged in coming up with standards, coming up with the protocols and what that needs to be done. So basically we want to work with the youth, and we will be reaching out to you through the national and the regional IGF to see how we can work. So to the panelists, many, many thanks for your contribution. It was an exciting forum, and we hope the participants enjoyed as well and had something to learn. Over to you, the moderator.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you very much, Olalade. Thank you very much, Nnenna and Ouanilo. It was very